Miss Eleanor Darrow had learned long ago that invisibility was her only armor in a world designed to overlook women like her, impoverished, educated, and utterly expendable. So when the Duke of Ashford hired her to coax his reclusive sister into society, Eleanor expected nothing more than cold corridors and colder dismissals. What she did not expect was the Duke himself, sharp-tongued, insufferably proud and far too observant, lingering in doorways to dissect her every word. And she certainly did not expect the morning she would overhear his mother declare that no paid companion would ever be suitable for a man of his station, even as the Duke's gaze followed Eleanor with something that looked dangerously like fascination. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments what part of the world you're listening from. I want to know how far it's traveled. Eleanor Darrow stood before the towering iron gates of Ashford Manor, her worn leather valise clutched in gloved hands that trembled despite her determination to appear composed. The November fog clung to the Derbyshire hills like a shroud, muffling the world beyond the estate's manicured grounds. She had travelled 2 days by coach from London, her small inheritance from her late father, a country vicar, barely sufficient to cover her mourning dress, let alone the life of genteel poverty that stretched before her like an endless, colourless tapestry. The position had come through Mrs. Pemberton's agency for refined ladies, an establishment that specialised in placing educated women of reduced circumstances into households that required discretion and desperation in equal measure. Companion wanted for young lady of quality must possess accomplishments in music, literature and French. Residence at Ashford Manor, Derbyshire, salary £40 per annum. Eleanor had applied without hesitation. £40 was a fortune to a woman who had been surviving on less than 20. The butler, a severe man named Greaves, whose expression suggested he had been weaned on vinegar, escorted her through marble halls that gleamed with old wealth. Portraits of Fitzalan ancestors, the Duke's family name was Fitzalan, she had learned, stared down from gilded frames, their painted eyes following her progress with aristocratic disdain. Eleanor kept her gaze forward, her spine straight, despite the exhaustion that made her bones ache. She would not give them, these dead lords and ladies, the satisfaction of seeing her cower. "Miss Darrow," Greaves announced, opening double doors to reveal a drawing room decorated in shades of cream and gold. "For her Grace." The Dowager Duchess of Ashford sat enthroned in a high-backed chair upholstered in peacock blue velvet, her silver hair arranged in elaborate curls that must have taken her maid hours to achieve. She was perhaps 60, her face still handsome despite the severity of her expression, and she wore black silk that rustled with expensive whispers as she shifted to examine Eleanor with the thoroughness of a horse trader evaluating livestock. "You are younger than I expected," the Dowager said without preamble. Her voice was clipped, each word enunciated with the precision of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "How old are you, Miss Darrow?" 24, Your Grace." You have references." Eleanor produced the letters from her reticule, knowing they were modest at best. A testimonial from the vicar who had taken over her father's parish, another from the headmistress of the small school where Eleanor had taught music for 6 months before the school closed. The Dowager barely glanced at them before setting them aside. "My daughter, Lady Beatrice, is 21 and has yet to make her debut in society," the Dowager continued, her tone suggesting this was both a tragedy and a personal affront. "She is delicate, shy to the point of reclusiveness. Her father's death 3 years ago affected her profoundly, and she has refused every attempt to bring her into company. Her brother, His Grace the Duke, believes a young companion near her own age might succeed where governesses and elder ladies have failed. You will encourage her to practice her accomplishments, accompany her on walks, and gradually introduce her to the idea of entering society. You will not coddle her weaknesses or permit her to retreat into melancholy. Do you understand?" "I understand, Your Grace." The dowager's eyes narrowed. "You speak well for a vicar's daughter. Where were you educated?" "At home, your grace. My father believed education should not be wasted on sons alone. I read Latin, French, and Italian. I play the pianoforte and harp. I have some skill in watercolors. Accomplishments are irrelevant if you cannot manage my daughter's temperament. Beatrice is not difficult, but she is immovable. She has convinced herself that the world beyond these walls is hostile and dangerous. You must prove otherwise." Eleanor nodded, though privately she wondered if Lady Beatrice's assessment of the world might not be entirely inaccurate. The world was hostile to women without protection or fortune. But she kept this observation to herself. "You will take your meals with Beatrice in the schoolroom, unless invited to dine with the family," the dowager continued. "You will have Sundays free to attend church and write correspondence. Your salary will be paid quarterly. Greaves will show you to your room. Beatrice is currently in the music room. You may introduce yourself this afternoon." Eleanor was being dismissed. She rose, curtsied, and turned to follow Greaves back into the corridor. She had nearly reached the door when a new voice, male and edged with amusement, stopped her in her tracks. "Good God, Mother! Are you interviewing companions or recruiting soldiers for the Peninsular campaign?" Eleanor turned despite herself. The man who entered the drawing room was tall, dark-haired, and possessed of the kind of effortless elegance that came from generations of breeding and wealth. His coat was perfectly tailored, his cravat tied in a style Eleanor recognized from fashion plates as the mathematical. He was perhaps 30, with a lean, angular face that might have been handsome if not for the cynical set of his mouth and the cool assessment in his grey eyes. "Your Grace," the dowager said, her tone icy, "Miss Darrow was just leaving." Was she? The Duke, for it could only be he, studied Eleanor with the same dispassionate interest his mother had shown. How unfortunate. I had hoped to meet the woman who will attempt what a parade of stern matrons could not accomplish. Eleanor met his gaze directly, a small act of rebellion she permitted herself. "I am honored by your confidence, Your Grace, though I suspect you have none." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. The dowager inhaled audibly, and Greaves, standing behind Eleanor, made a strangled sound that might have been shock or suppressed laughter. The Duke's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or the faintest glimmer of respect. "You are correct, Miss Darrow. I have no confidence whatsoever that you will succeed, but I admire your willingness to state the obvious. It is a rare quality in this house." "Ashford!" the dowager snapped. "I am merely being honest, Mother. Beatrice has defeated every companion, governess, and lady's maid we have employed in the past 3 years. Miss Darrow should understand what she's facing." Eleanor felt a spark of irritation kindle beneath her carefully maintained composure. "Lady Beatrice is not an enemy to be defeated, Your Grace. She is a young woman who has suffered loss and requires understanding, not strategies." "Ah," the Duke said softly, "a reformer. How refreshing." His tone suggested it was anything but. Eleanor curtsied again, deeper this time, her movements precise and deliberate. "If Your Grace will excuse me, I should like to settle into my room and prepare to meet Lady Beatrice." She left before either the Duke or his mother could respond, following Greaves through corridors that seemed to multiply like a labyrinth. Her room, when they finally reached it, was small but comfortable. A single bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand, a narrow wardrobe, and a window that overlooked the gardens. It was far superior to the cramped boarding-house room she had left behind in London, and for a moment Eleanor allowed herself to feel a flicker of gratitude. But the Duke's words echoed in her mind. "I have no confidence whatsoever that you will succeed." She had heard such dismissals before, from men who believed women existed only to be ornamental or obedient. She had learned to armor herself against them. But there had been something else in the Duke's gaze, a challenge, perhaps, or a test. Very well, Eleanor thought as she unpacked her few belongings. If the Duke of Ashford expected her to fail, she would take immense satisfaction in proving him wrong. That afternoon, Eleanor descended to the music room, a sunlit chamber filled with instruments and shelves of sheet music. Lady Beatrice Fitzalan sat at the pianoforte, her hands resting motionless on the keys. She was smaller than Eleanor had anticipated, with pale blonde hair and the same grey eyes as her brother, though hers were softer, shadowed by an anxiety that seemed to vibrate in the air around her. "Lady Beatrice," Eleanor said gently. The girl startled, her hands jerking back from the keys as though they had burned her. Who are you?" "I am Eleanor Darrow, your new companion. Your mother engaged me to keep you company." Beatrice's expression shuttered. "I do not need a companion. I'm perfectly content here." Eleanor moved slowly into the room, careful not to approach too quickly. "May I sit?" Beatrice hesitated, then nodded. Eleanor settled onto the bench beside her, close enough to be companionable, but far enough to respect her space. The pianoforte was a beautiful instrument, its wood gleaming with care. "Do you play?" Eleanor asked. "I used to." Beatrice's voice was barely a whisper. Before your father passed?" Beatrice nodded, her eyes fixed on the keys. Eleanor waited, letting the silence stretch. She had learned during her months as a teacher that sometimes silence was the only language grief understood. Finally, Beatrice spoke again. "Everyone says I should move on, that I should go to London, attend balls, find a husband. They do not understand that the world is too loud, too crowded. I am not strong enough for it." "Or perhaps," Eleanor said carefully, "strength is not about enduring noise, but about finding the quiet spaces within yourself. Would you play something for me?" Beatrice looked at her for the first time, really looked, and Eleanor saw the loneliness there, the desperate, aching isolation of someone who had been trapped inside their own fear for so long they no longer remembered what freedom felt like. "I am not very good," Beatrice warned. "Neither am I," Eleanor lied. Beatrice's hands returned to the keys, tentative at first, then gaining confidence as the notes of a Mozart sonata filled the room. She was, Eleanor noted, technically proficient, but emotionally restrained, as though she feared what might happen if she allowed herself to feel too deeply. When the piece ended, Eleanor smiled. "That was lovely. Shall we try a duet?" Beatrice blinked, surprised. "A duet? Why not? It is easier to be brave when you are not alone." And for the first time since Eleanor had entered Ashford Manor, Lady Beatrice Fitzalan smiled. 3 months into her tenure at Ashford Manor, Eleanor had made modest but undeniable progress with Lady Beatrice. The girl now joined the family for dinner twice weekly, spoke in full sentences rather than whispered fragments, and had even agreed to accompany Eleanor on walks through the estate grounds when the weather permitted. The dowager, while never warm, had begun to nod approvingly at Eleanor's reports. Even Greaves, the dower butler, had softened enough to offer Eleanor tea when she worked late, organising Beatrice's music collection. The Duke, however, remained an enigma wrapped in aristocratic disdain. He appeared at unpredictable intervals. In the library, when Eleanor borrowed books for Beatrice, in the music room doorway, as Eleanor coaxed his sister through a Beethoven piece, in the morning room, when Eleanor was teaching Beatrice the finer points of watercolour landscapes. He never spoke to Eleanor directly during these intrusions, but she felt his presence like a weight, his grey eyes dissecting her methods, with an intensity that made her fingers tremble over piano keys and paintbrushes alike. "Your brother watches you," Eleanor observed one afternoon, as she and Beatrice walked through the gardens. Winter had given way to early spring, and crocuses pushed through the thawing earth in defiant bursts of purple and gold. Beatrice smiled slightly. "He watches everyone. Ashford believes observation is a ducal duty, like managing tenants or sitting in the House of Lords. He does not trust easily. Does he trust you?" "He loves me," Beatrice said, the distinction clear in her voice. "Trust is different. Trust requires surrender, and my brother does not surrender anything." Eleanor considered this as they walked. The Duke was a contradiction. Cold, but not cruel. Distant, but not indifferent. He had hired her, despite his stated lack of confidence, because he wanted his sister to heal. That suggested a capacity for hope, even if he refused to acknowledge it. "Lady Beatrice," Eleanor said carefully, "have you considered attending a small gathering? Nothing as overwhelming as a London ball, perhaps a dinner party here at Ashford Manor with a few trusted guests?" Beatrice stopped walking. "No, I cannot. Cannot or will not. Both." Beatrice's voice trembled. "You do not understand, Miss Darrow. I am not merely shy, I am broken. When I enter a room with strangers, my chest tightens until I cannot breathe. My hands shake, my voice disappears. I become paralyzed by the certainty that everyone is judging me, finding me lacking. I cannot endure it." Eleanor took Beatrice's hand, her grip firm and warm. "You are not broken. You are afraid. And fear is not a failing. It is a challenge, one we will face together." But Beatrice pulled away, her expression crumbling. "You sound like Ashford. He believes willpower can conquer anything. It cannot." Eleanor wanted to argue, but before she could form the words, a footman appeared on the garden path, his expression urgent. "Miss Darrow, Her Grace requests your immediate presence in the drawing-room." Eleanor exchanged a glance with Beatrice, whose face had gone pale. "Go," Beatrice whispered. "Mamma only summons people when something is wrong." The drawing-room was crowded when Eleanor arrived. The Dowager, the Duke, and 3 people Eleanor did not recognize. 2 were women dressed in the height of fashion, their gowns adorned with ribbons and lace that proclaimed wealth and taste. The 3rd was a man, perhaps the Duke's age, with auburn hair and the kind of easy charm that came from a lifetime of being admired. "Ah, Miss Darrow," the Dowager said, her tone deceptively pleasant. "Allow me to introduce Lady Harriet Caldwell, her daughter Miss Lydia Caldwell, and Viscount Pemberton. They are old friends of the family and have come to discuss a matter of some importance." Eleanor curtsied, her instincts prickling with warning. "Your Grace, my lady, my lord." Lady Caldwell, a handsome woman with shrewd blue eyes, smiled in a way that did not reach those eyes. "The Duke has told us of your efforts with Lady Beatrice, Miss Darrow. Most admirable. It is so difficult to find suitable companions for young ladies these days. Lady Beatrice is a pleasure to work with," Eleanor said carefully. "Indeed," Lady Caldwell continued, "which is why it is such a pity that your services will no longer be required." The words struck like a physical blow. Eleanor's gaze snapped to the Duke, who stood by the window, his expression unreadable. "Your Grace, Miss Caldwell has agreed to serve as my sister's companion," the Duke said, his voice flat. "She and Beatrice were friends as children before my father's death. Lady Caldwell believes their renewed acquaintance will be beneficial." Miss Lydia Caldwell stepped forward, her blonde curls bouncing with practiced grace. She was beautiful in the way of porcelain dolls, flawless and utterly lifeless. "I am so looking forward to renewing my friendship with dear Beatrice," she cooed. "We shall have such delightful times together." Eleanor's mind raced. This was not about Beatrice's welfare, it was about something else entirely. She saw it in the way Lady Caldwell's gaze lingered on the Duke, calculating and predatory. She saw it in the Dowager's satisfied smile, as though a long-awaited plan had finally come to fruition. "Lady Beatrice and I have made significant progress," Eleanor said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "It would be disruptive to her routine to introduce a new companion now." "Routine?" Lady Caldwell laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "My dear Miss Darrow, young ladies of quality do not require routines. They require proper connections and guidance from their own social sphere. You have done your best, I am sure, but Beatrice needs someone who understands the expectations of her station." "Someone like Miss Caldwell," the Dowager added. Eleanor felt the ground crumbling beneath her feet. "May I speak with Lady Beatrice before any decision is finalized?" "That will not be necessary," the Duke said, still not looking at her. "Miss Caldwell will begin her duties tomorrow. Greaves will assist you in packing your belongings. You will receive 3 months' salary as compensation for the abrupt termination of your position. 3 months' salary, as though money could compensate for being dismissed like a servant who had broken too many dishes. As though her work, her care for Beatrice, meant nothing. "Your Grace," Eleanor said, her voice barely above a whisper, "Lady Beatrice trusts me. If you replace me without explanation, you will undo everything we have accomplished. She will retreat further into isolation." "Beatrice will adapt," the Dowager said dismissively. "She is a Fitzalan. We do not coddle weakness." Eleanor looked at the Duke then, really looked, searching for some sign that he understood what he was doing. But his expression remained closed, impenetrable as marble. "Very well," Eleanor said, the words tasting like ash. "If your Grace believes this is the correct course, I will not argue further." She curtsied and turned to leave. Her vision blurring with tears she refused to shed in front of these people. But before she reached the door, Miss Caldwell's voice stopped her. "Oh, Miss Darrow, I do hope there are no hard feelings. You must understand, a paid companion can never be more than a temporary solution. Women of your circumstances are simply not suited for permanent positions in households like Ashford Manor." The cruelty was deliberate, designed to wound, and it succeeded. Eleanor fled the drawing room, her composure shattering as she ran through corridors that had begun to feel like home, past servants who averted their eyes in pity, until she reached her small room and closed the door behind her. She sank onto the bed, her hands covering her face as the sobs finally broke free. She had been a fool. She had allowed herself to believe that her education, her dedication, her care for Beatrice might matter in a world that valued birth and wealth above all else. She had forgotten the fundamental truth of her existence. She was expendable, replaceable, invisible, except when her presence became inconvenient. A soft knock interrupted her grief. "Miss Darrow?" Beatrice's voice small and frightened. Eleanor wiped her eyes and opened the door. Beatrice stood in the corridor, her face streaked with tears. "They told me," Beatrice whispered. "Ashford said you are leaving. He said Lydia will be my companion now. I told him I do not want Lydia. I want you, but he would not listen. He never listens." Eleanor pulled Beatrice into an embrace, her own heartbreak momentarily forgotten in the face of the girl's distress. "Hush. It will be all right." "No, it will not. Lydia is cruel. She was cruel when we were children, and she is cruel now. She will not help me. She will mock me. And Mama will permit it, because Lydia is Lady Caldwell's daughter, and Lady Caldwell wants Ashford to marry Lydia." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The abrupt dismissal, the Dowager's satisfaction, Lady Caldwell's calculating gaze. Eleanor was being removed because her presence interfered with a matrimonial scheme. Miss Lydia Caldwell was being positioned as the Duke's future wife, and her role as Beatrice's companion was merely a pretext to install her at Ashford Manor. "Beatrice," Eleanor said gently, "has your brother given Miss Caldwell any indication that he intends to court her?" "No. Ashford does not wish to marry anyone. But Mama is determined, and Mama always gets what she wants." Eleanor held Beatrice tighter, fury and helplessness warring in her chest. She wanted to storm back to the drawing room, to confront the Duke and demand he reconsider. But what good would it do? She was a paid companion, easily dismissed, and just as easily forgotten. That evening, Eleanor packed her belongings with mechanical efficiency. She would return to London, find another position through Mrs. Pemberton's agency, and pretend that these 3 months at Ashford Manor had never happened. She would forget Lady Beatrice's tentative smile, the satisfaction of watching a frightened girl gain confidence, the strange, unsettling awareness she felt whenever the Duke's grey eyes followed her across a room. She would forget all of it. But as she folded her dresses and wrapped her few books, Eleanor knew that forgetting would be impossible. And she knew, with a certainty that burned like fever, that she had just been made a pawn in someone else's game, a game she had lost before she even realized she was playing. London swallowed Eleanor as it swallowed all women without fortune or protection, indifferently, completely. She returned to the boarding house on Wimpole Street, a narrow building that smelled perpetually of boiled cabbage and mildew, and resumed the precarious existence she had briefly escaped. Mrs. Pemberton's agency had no immediate positions available, and Eleanor's savings dwindled with alarming speed, despite her careful economies. She took work where she could find it, mending lace for a dressmaker in Cheapside, copying legal documents for a solicitor who paid by the page, teaching piano to the young daughters of a merchant family in Clerkenwell. The work was tedious and poorly compensated, but it kept her fed and sheltered, barely. 6 weeks after her departure from Ashford Manor, a letter arrived bearing the Fitzallen seal. Eleanor's hands trembled as she broke the wax, hope and dread twisting in her stomach. But the letter was not from the Duke or the Dowager. It was from Lady Beatrice. "Dearest Eleanor, I write to you in desperation. Lydia is everything I feared she would be. False, mocking, and interested only in capturing Ashford's attention. She does not care for my welfare. She encourages me to remain in my rooms, telling Mamma and Ashford that I am unwell and unsuited for company, when in truth she simply wishes to be free to pursue my brother without my presence to complicate matters. Ashford has become distant and cold. I do not know if he realizes Lydia's true nature or if he simply does not care. Mamma is pleased, of course. She speaks openly of a wedding by summer. I miss you terribly. You were the only person who treated me as though I were capable of bravery. I think of our walks in the garden and our duets at the pianoforte, and I feel as though I have lost the only friend I ever had. I do not know why I am writing this, except to tell you that you mattered. You still matter. With affection, Beatrice." Eleanor read the letter 3 times, her throat tight with emotion. She wanted to respond, to offer comfort, but what could she say? "Be strong, Beatrice. Endure. Find your courage." The platitudes tasted like ashes, even in her mind. That afternoon, Eleanor walked to Hyde Park, needing air and space to think. The park was crowded with fashionable Londoners, taking advantage of the mild spring weather. Ladies in pastel gowns strolling with parasols, gentlemen on horseback, children playing under the watchful eyes of nursemaids. Eleanor felt invisible among them, a ghost drifting through a world that had no place for her. "Miss Darrow?" The voice was female, cultured, and vaguely familiar. Eleanor turned to find a woman perhaps 50 years old, elegantly dressed in lavender silk, with sharp green eyes and a smile that suggested both intelligence and mischief. "I am sorry," Eleanor said. "I do not believe we have met." "We have not, but I know who you are. I am Lady Agatha Thornfield, sister to the late Duke of Ashford, Beatrice's aunt. May I walk with you?" Eleanor was too surprised to refuse. They fell into step together, moving away from the crowded paths toward the quieter edges of the park. "How do you know who I am?" Eleanor asked. "Beatrice writes to me regularly," Lady Agatha said. "She is my favorite niece, my only niece, in fact, and I take her happiness seriously. She has written extensively about you, Miss Darrow. She credits you with teaching her that fear is not the same as cowardice. Lady Beatrice is braver than she realizes. And you, Miss Darrow, are more accomplished than your station suggests. Beatrice tells me you speak 3 languages, play multiple instruments, and possess a wit sharp enough to disarm even my impossibly arrogant nephew." Eleanor flushed. "I spoke out of turn during our first meeting. I should not have—" "Nonsense. Ashford needs to be challenged. He has been managing the dukedom since he was 27, and everyone in his sphere either fears him or fawns over him. You did neither. That is why he could not stop watching you." Eleanor's heart stuttered. "I do not know what you mean." Lady Agatha's smile widened. "Do you not? Beatrice wrote that Ashford appeared in whatever room you occupied with suspicious frequency, that he questioned her endlessly about your methods, that he once defended your unconventional approach to the Dowager, insisting that Miss Darrow's innovations, while unorthodox, have achieved results where traditional methods failed. High praise from a man who rarely praises anyone. Then why did he dismiss me?" Because my insufferable sister-in-law, the Dowager, and Lady Caldwell conspired to install Lydia as Beatrice's companion, positioning the girl as a future duchess. Ashford does not wish to marry Lydia, but he is dutiful to a fault and believes managing his mother's expectations is part of his responsibility. He sacrificed you to maintain peace in his household. The bitterness in Eleanor's chest intensified. Then he is a coward. No, Lady Agatha said thoughtfully. He is a man who has been taught that duty supersedes personal inclination. But I did not seek you out to discuss my nephew's failings. I came to offer you a position. Eleanor stopped walking. A position. I maintain a house in Bloomsbury and host a salon every Thursday evening. Writers, artists, scholars, reformers, people of genuine intellect and passion, regardless of birth or fortune. I need someone to assist me in managing correspondence, organizing speakers, and facilitating discussions. The salary is £60 per annum, with room and board included. You would have Sundays and Mondays free, and you would be surrounded by people who value ideas over pedigree. It was more than Eleanor had dared hope for, more than she deserved. Why me? Because Beatrice loves you. And because you had the courage to speak honestly to a duke, which suggests you will not be intimidated by poets or philosophers. Will you accept? Eleanor's vision blurred with tears. Yes, yes, I will accept. Lady Agatha squeezed her hand. Good. You will begin Monday next. Bring your belongings to number 12, Bloomsbury Square. I think you will find the work considerably more stimulating than enduring my sister-in-law's icy disapproval. Eleanor laughed, the sound shaky but genuine. For the first time since leaving Ashford Manor, she felt the faintest spark of hope. The house on Bloomsbury Square was a revelation. Unlike the oppressive grandeur of Ashford Manor, Lady Agatha's residence was warm, cluttered, and alive with ideas. Books overflowed from shelves. Paintings in various states of completion leaned against walls, and every surface bore evidence of intellectual curiosity. Manuscripts, botanical specimens, musical scores, maps marked with explorations both real and imagined. Eleanor's room was small but charming, with a window overlooking a garden where Lady Agatha cultivated herbs for medicinal experiments. I dabble in natural philosophy, Lady Agatha explained, when Eleanor expressed surprise at the laboratory equipment in the conservatory. The world is full of mysteries, Miss Darrow, and I intend to unravel as many as possible before I die. Eleanor's duties were varied and engaging. She wrote letters to potential speakers, organized the salon's library, and welcomed guests on Thursday evenings. The salon itself was unlike anything Eleanor had experienced. A gathering of minds unrestrained by social convention. Poets debated with scientists, artists argued with politicians, and women spoke with the same authority as men. Eleanor, accustomed to making herself small and silent, found her own voice emerging in these discussions, her opinions valued and challenged in equal measure. It was at one of these Thursday gatherings, 8 weeks into her employment, that she met Dr. Elias Finch, a physician who had recently returned from serving with the army in Portugal. He was perhaps 35, with kind brown eyes and an air of quiet competence that reminded Eleanor, painfully, of her father. "Miss Darrow," he said during a break in the evening's debate on prison reform, "Lady Agatha tells me you were recently employed at Ashford Manor. I knew the late Duke slightly, a good man, deeply devoted to his family. His death was a terrible loss. Lady Beatrice still grieves him," Eleanor said softly. "And the current Duke? What is your assessment of him?" Eleanor hesitated, searching for honesty without betraying her complicated feelings. "He is dutiful, intelligent, and impossibly proud. He loves his sister, but does not know how to help her. And he allows others to make decisions he should make himself." Dr. Finch smiled. "A harsh assessment, but perhaps not unwarranted. The burden of such a title at a young age can warp a man's judgment. He learns to value duty over instinct, obligation over desire. You defend him. I understand him. There is a difference." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of new guests, but Eleanor found herself returning to Dr. Finch throughout the evening, drawn by his thoughtfulness and the absence of condescension in his manner. He treated her as an intellectual equal, asking her opinions on literature and philosophy, listening with genuine interest when she spoke. As the guests departed near midnight, Dr. Finch approached Eleanor once more. "Miss Darrow, I wonder if you might permit me to call on you. Lady Agatha has mentioned you enjoy walking in the parks, and I find myself in need of companionship for such excursions." Eleanor's heart fluttered with something that was not quite attraction, but was undeniably pleasant. "I would be honored, Dr. Finch." That night, as Eleanor prepared for bed, she allowed herself to imagine a future that did not include Ashford Manor, the Duke's cold grey eyes, or the ache of being dismissed. A future where she was valued for her mind, where her companionship was sought rather than purchased, where she might, perhaps, find something resembling happiness. But before sleep claimed her, she thought of Beatrice, alone at Ashford Manor with a companion who did not care for her, and a brother too burdened by duty to see his sister's pain. And Eleanor wondered if escape was possible when part of your heart remained trapped in a place you could never return to. 3 months after beginning her employment with Lady Agatha, Eleanor attended a lecture at the Royal Society on advances in botanical classification. It was the sort of event she would never have imagined attending in her previous life. A gathering of scientists, scholars, and enlightened aristocrats who valued knowledge above social hierarchy. Lady Agatha had insisted Eleanor accompany her, arguing that exposure to scientific discourse would enhance Eleanor's ability to facilitate salon discussions. The lecture hall was crowded, filled with the murmur of intellectual anticipation. Eleanor settled into her seat beside Lady Agatha, arranging her shawl and opening her notebook to record observations. She was reaching for her pencil when a familiar voice, cold and edged with surprise, spoke behind her. "Aunt Agatha, I did not expect to see you here." Eleanor's hand froze. She turned slowly, already knowing what she would see. The Duke of Ashford stood in the aisle, impeccably dressed in a dark coat and dove-grey waistcoat, his expression carefully neutral. But his eyes, those cold grey eyes, widened fractionally when they met Eleanor's. "Ashford," Lady Agatha said cheerfully, as though she had orchestrated this meeting, which, Eleanor realized with a sinking sensation, she almost certainly had. "How delightful. Allow me to reintroduce my assistant, Miss Eleanor Darrow." The Duke's gaze never left Eleanor's face. "Miss Darrow and I are acquainted." "Are you? How convenient. Do sit with us, Ashford. There is an empty seat just there." The Duke had no graceful way to refuse. He settled into the seat beside Eleanor, his proximity overwhelming in the confined space. She could smell the faint scent of sandalwood from his soap, feel the warmth of his body despite the careful inches between them. "Miss Darrow," he said quietly, his voice devoid of inflection, "I trust you are well." "Quite well, Your Grace. And Lady Beatrice?" His jaw tightened. "My sister is managing." "Managing," Eleanor repeated, the word tasting bitter. "How reassuring." Lady Agatha, seated on Eleanor's other side, made a sound suspiciously like suppressed laughter. "Do pay attention, both of you. The lecture is beginning." Eleanor tried to focus on the speaker, a botanist from Cambridge expounding on the Linnaean system, but her awareness remained fixed on the Duke. He sat rigidly, his hands gripping the arms of his chair as though restraining himself from flight. She wondered what he was thinking, whether he felt guilt over her dismissal or simply annoyance at this unexpected encounter. When the lecture concluded, Lady Agatha rose immediately. "Ashford, you must escort Miss Darrow to my carriage while I speak with Professor Henderson about his fascinating work on plant hybridization. I will only be a moment." She swept away before either Eleanor or the Duke could protest, leaving them stranded in a sea of departing scholars. The Duke offered his arm with visible reluctance. Eleanor accepted with equal reluctance. They walked in tense silence through the corridors and into the evening air, where carriages crowded the street like restless horses. "My aunt," the Duke said finally, is meddling. Your aunt is kind. She's also incapable of resisting the urge to manipulate people for their own good. Eleanor stopped walking, forcing him to face her. Did you know she would be here tonight? Did you know I would be here? No. I came because I have an interest in botanical science. I did not anticipate— He trailed off, his expression troubled. Encountering the companion you dismissed? Eleanor finished. I imagine it is awkward, Your Grace, to be reminded of people you would prefer to forget. I have not forgotten you, Miss Darrow. The admission hung between them, raw and unexpected. Eleanor did not know how to respond. Before she could attempt it, a familiar voice, high and artificially sweet, called out from a nearby carriage. Your Grace, what a delightful surprise! Miss Lydia Caldwell descended from the carriage with practiced grace, her silk gown shimmering in the lamplight. She was accompanied by her mother, Lady Caldwell, whose smile was all sharp edges. Miss Caldwell, the Duke said, his tone polite but unenthusiastic. Lady Caldwell, I did not realize you attended scientific lectures. Oh, we do not as a rule, Lydia said with a tinkling laugh, but Mamma heard you might be here, and we thought it would be pleasant to offer you a ride back to Mayfair. We are staying at Ashford House for the season, after all. Eleanor's stomach clenched. So the Caldwells had installed themselves at the Duke's London residence. The matrimonial scheme was advancing precisely as planned. Lydia's gaze shifted to Eleanor, and recognition flared in her blue eyes. Miss Darrow, how unexpected! I thought you had returned to whatever provincial town you came from. I am employed by Lady Agatha Thornfield, Eleanor said evenly. Ah, another temporary position then? Lydia's smile was poison wrapped in lace. How fortunate you are able to find work at all, given your circumstances. Miss Darrow's circumstances, the Duke said, his voice dropping into dangerous quiet, are none of your concern, Miss Caldwell. Lydia blinked, clearly surprised by his sharp tone. I meant no offence, Your Grace. You were merely being unkind. Lady Agatha's voice rang out as she emerged from the lecture hall. A habit you displayed even as a child, Lydia. I see you have not outgrown it. Lady Caldwell bristled. Lady Agatha, surely you do not mean to insult my daughter. I mean to state an observable fact. Lady Agatha linked her arm through Eleanor's, a gesture of unmistakable support. Miss Darrow is a woman of education and integrity, qualities your daughter would do well to emulate. Come, Eleanor, our carriage is waiting. They swept away, leaving the Duke standing between the Caldwells and the retreating figures of Eleanor and Lady Agatha. Eleanor did not look back, though she desperately wanted to see his face, to understand what he was thinking. In the carriage, Lady Agatha patted Eleanor's hand. Well done, my dear. You did not flinch. I wanted to, Eleanor admitted. Of course you did. But courage is not the absence of fear. It is action despite fear. And you, Miss Darrow, are far braver than you realize. 2 weeks later, Lady Agatha announced she would be hosting a special salon, a musical evening featuring a renowned soprano from Vienna and several accomplished instrumentalists. I am inviting Ashford, she informed Eleanor, and Beatrice, if she will come. I have written to my niece, urging her to attend. She needs to see you thriving, Eleanor. She needs to know that women can survive being discarded by men too blind to appreciate them. Eleanor's heart raced at the thought of seeing Beatrice again. Do you think she will come? If she has any of her father's courage, yes. If she has only her mother's cowardice, no. The evening of the salon arrived with oppressive heat, the kind that made London's air thick and difficult to breathe. Eleanor dressed carefully in her best gown, a simple but well-made dress of dusky rose muslin that Lady Agatha had insisted on purchasing for her. You cannot facilitate my salon looking like a governess, Lady Agatha had said firmly. You are my assistant, not my servant. Guests began arriving at 8, filling the drawing room with conversation and laughter. Eleanor moved among them, ensuring everyone had refreshments and introducing newcomers to the regular attendees. She was speaking with Dr. Finch, who had become a frequent visitor, his attentions increasingly marked, when Lady Agatha appeared at her elbow. "They are here," she murmured. Eleanor turned. The Duke stood in the doorway, tall and imposing, his expression guarded. Beside him, almost hidden in his shadow, was Beatrice. The girl looked thinner than Eleanor remembered, her face pale and drawn. But when her eyes found Eleanor across the crowded room, her entire countenance transformed. She pulled away from her brother and hurried forward, decorum forgotten. "Eleanor!" Beatrice threw her arms around Eleanor in an embrace that spoke of desperation and relief. "I did not believe you would truly be here. I thought perhaps Aunt Agatha was inventing stories to comfort me." Eleanor held her tightly. "I am here, and I have missed you terribly." When they finally separated, Beatrice was crying. "Lydia is awful. She tells Mama I am making progress, but she does not even try. She spends all her time pursuing Ashford, and Mama encourages it because she wants them to marry. But Ashford does not want her. I know he does not. He's simply too stubborn to refuse when Mama presents it as his duty." "Beatrice," the Duke's voice, low and strained. Beatrice turned to her brother, her expression defiant. "I am telling Eleanor the truth. You should tell the truth as well. That is enough." "It is not enough. You dismissed the only person who ever helped me, and for what? So Mama could parade Lydia before you like a prize mare? So you could pretend that duty is more important than happiness?" The room had gone silent, all eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. Eleanor wanted to intervene, to stop this before Beatrice said something she would regret. But before she could move, Dr. Finch stepped forward. "Lady Beatrice," he said gently, "would you permit me to show you the conservatory? Lady Agatha cultivates rare orchids, and I believe you would find them fascinating." Beatrice hesitated, then nodded. Dr. Finch offered his arm, and they disappeared through the doorway, leaving Eleanor alone with the Duke and an audience of fascinated onlookers. Lady Agatha clapped her hands once, sharply. "The music will begin in 10 minutes. Do find your seats." The guests dispersed, their murmurs speculative but obedient. Eleanor made to follow, but the Duke's voice stopped her. "Miss Darrow, a word, if you please." They moved to the far corner of the room, near the window overlooking the darkened garden. The Duke stood with his back to the glass, his expression inscrutable in the lamplight. "My sister loves you," he said finally. "I love her as well. I made a mistake in dismissing you. I see that now." Eleanor's breath caught. "Do you? You were helping her. The moment you left, she retreated. She stopped playing music, stopped attempting social interactions. Miss Caldwell is inadequate. But the arrangement was made, and I did not know how to unmake it without causing greater disruption. So you chose duty over your sister's welfare." His jaw clenched. "I chose what I believed was the least damaging option." "You chose wrong, Your Grace." "Dudu." The Duke looked at her then, really looked, and Eleanor saw something raw and unguarded in his eyes. Regret, perhaps, or longing. "I am aware of that, Miss Darrow. I am painfully aware." Before Eleanor could respond, Dr. Finch reappeared with Beatrice, who looked calmer but still fragile. "The music is beginning," Dr. Finch announced. "Shall we find seats?" The evening progressed with exquisite awkwardness. Eleanor sat between Dr. Finch and Beatrice, painfully aware of the Duke seated 2 rows behind them, his presence a weight she could not ignore. The soprano's voice soared through the room, beautiful and heartbreaking, singing of love lost and love found, and Eleanor felt each note like a knife. When the performance ended and guests began departing, Dr. Finch approached Eleanor with a smile. "Miss Darrow, might I call on you tomorrow? There is something I would like to discuss." Eleanor knew what he was going to ask. She saw it in his eyes. In the careful formality of his words, Dr. Finch was going to propose. "Of course," she heard herself say. "I would be honored." He bowed and departed, leaving Eleanor feeling strangely hollow. She turned to find the Duke watching her, his expression unreadable. "Dr. Finch is a good man," the Duke said quietly. "He is. You could do far worse." "I could do far better as well, Your Grace." The Duke flinched, as though she had struck him. Without another word, he collected Beatrice and left, and Eleanor stood alone in the emptying room, wondering why victory felt so much like defeat. Dr. Elias Finch proposed 3 days later in Lady Agatha's garden, amid the herbs and medicinal plants, with the morning sun casting long shadows across the grass. He spoke eloquently of admiration, companionship, and the life they could build together. A partnership of equals, he promised, founded on mutual respect and shared intellectual curiosity. Eleanor listened, her hands folded in her lap, her heart aching with the unfairness of it all. Dr. Finch was everything she should want: kind, intelligent, respectful. He offered her security, purpose, a place in the world. He offered her everything except the one thing she could not name, but felt like a hunger in her bones. "You are hesitating," Dr. Finch observed gently. "May I know why?" Eleanor met his eyes, those kind brown eyes that deserved honesty. "Because I do not love you, Dr. Finch, and you deserve to be loved." He smiled, though the expression was tinged with sadness. "Love can grow, Miss Darrow. I have seen it happen in the best marriages. Perhaps. But I cannot promise you something I do not feel." Dr. Finch was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "There is someone else." It was not a question. Eleanor wanted to deny it, but the lie would not come. "There is someone I cannot have, someone who represents everything I should not want. The Duke." Eleanor closed her eyes. "Yes. Does he know?" "No, and it does not matter. He is bound by duty and expectation. I am bound by birth and fortune. We exist in different worlds." Dr. Finch took her hand, his grip warm and steady. "You are wrong, Miss Darrow. You exist in the same world, the world of intelligent, feeling people who deserve happiness. The rest is artifice. Artifice determines our lives, Dr. Finch, only if we allow it to." He released her hand and rose. "I will not press you for an answer now. Think on what I have offered, and consider whether the impossible might, with courage, become possible." He left her there, alone with the herbs and the morning light, and Eleanor wept for the kindness of a good man and the cruelty of her own traitorous heart. That evening, a letter arrived from Beatrice. Eleanor opened it with trembling fingers. "Dearest Eleanor, I am writing to tell you something miraculous and terrifying. After seeing you at Aunt Agatha's salon, after witnessing you thriving in a world that values your mind and spirit, I have decided to be brave. I have told Mamma and Ashford that I will not remain at Ashford Manor under Lydia's false companionship. I have told them I wish to live with Aunt Agatha in London, to attend her salons, to meet people who engage with ideas rather than gossip." Mamma was furious. She called me ungrateful, hysterical, a disappointment. "But Ashford, Eleanor, Ashford surprised me. He said I was right. He said he should have listened to me months ago when I begged him not to dismiss you. He has terminated Lydia's employment, much to Mamma's horror, and Lady Caldwell's outrage. The Caldwells have departed Ashford House in a tempest of wounded pride and thwarted ambition. Ashford has not said so explicitly, but I believe he regrets more than just dismissing you. I believe he has begun to question the assumptions that govern his life, the belief that duty must supersede desire, that feeling is weakness, that vulnerability is failure. I am coming to London next week. Aunt Agatha has agreed to sponsor me for the season, and I am both excited and utterly terrified. But I'm choosing to be brave because you taught me that bravery is not the absence of fear. It is movement toward what we want, despite the fear. What do you want, Eleanor? Not what is practical or safe, but what you truly want. With love, Beatrice Eleanor read the letter 3 times, her heart pounding. What did she want? The question was dangerous, the answer even more so. But she could no longer hide from it. She wanted the Duke, not his title, not his wealth, but the man himself. She wanted the intelligence that sparked in his grey eyes during their debates, the rare, reluctant smile that transformed his face, the fierce protectiveness he showed toward his sister. She wanted the right to challenge him, to be his intellectual equal and emotional partner. She wanted the impossible. Lady Agatha entered the study where Eleanor sat, her expression knowing. You have heard from Beatrice? Yes, she is coming to London. And Ashford has finally shown some sense in dismissing that appalling Caldwell girl. Lady Agatha settled into the chair across from Eleanor. Tell me, my dear, what will you do now? I do not know. Do you love my nephew? Eleanor's breath caught. I hardly know him. That is not an answer. I admire him. I am challenged by him. When I am in his presence, I feel more alive, more myself than I have ever felt. That, Lady Agatha said with satisfaction, is love, or at least the beginning of it. The question is, what will you do about it? Nothing. There is nothing I can do. He is a duke. I'm a paid companion. Such disparities cannot be bridged. Cannot, or should not. Lady Agatha leaned forward, her green eyes fierce. Eleanor, you are one of the most intelligent, accomplished, courageous women I have ever met. You do not have a title or a fortune, but you have something far more valuable: integrity. My nephew needs someone who will challenge him, who will refuse to let him hide behind duty and obligation. He needs you. He has not said so, because he is terrified. Men like Ashford, men who have carried impossible burdens from a young age, learn to fear vulnerability above all else. Someone must teach him that vulnerability is not weakness. Someone must love him enough to risk rejection. Eleanor's hands trembled. And if he rejects me? If I reveal my feelings and he dismisses them as inappropriate or presumptuous? Then you will survive, as you have survived every other disappointment. But Eleanor, what if he does not reject you? What if he has been waiting for permission to feel what he dare not acknowledge? Will you deny both of you happiness because you are afraid? Eleanor had no answer. That night she lay awake, Beatrice's question echoing in her mind. What do you want, Eleanor? She wanted the impossible. She wanted the Duke. And perhaps Lady Agatha was right. Perhaps the impossible, with courage, could become possible. 1 week later, Beatrice arrived in London with trunks of clothing, a lady's maid, and a determination that shone in her eyes like fever. She embraced Eleanor fiercely, then declared, I am going to attend every salon, every lecture, every gathering Aunt Agatha will take me to. I am going to live, Eleanor. Finally, truly live. And she did. Beatrice blossomed in London's intellectual circles, her shyness gradually giving way to cautious confidence. She spoke in salon discussions, attended the theatre, walked in the parks without fear. Eleanor watched with pride and bittersweet joy, knowing that her work with Beatrice, the work the Duke had dismissed, had borne fruit after all. The Duke himself appeared at Lady Agatha's house 1 month after Beatrice's arrival, requesting a private audience with Eleanor. Lady Agatha ushered him into the study and promptly disappeared, leaving them alone. The Duke looked different, less guarded, more uncertain. He stood by the window, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression troubled. Miss Darrow, he began, then stopped. Eleanor. May I call you Eleanor? Her heart stuttered. If you wish, Your Grace. Ashford. Please call me Ashford. Very well, Ashford. He turned to face her fully. I have come to apologize for dismissing you, for allowing my mother's and Lady Caldwell's machinations to blind me to what was best for Beatrice, for failing to recognize your value until you were gone. I accept your apology. I have also come to ask, that is, I wonder if you might consider... He stopped again, frustration creasing his brow. This is more difficult than I anticipated. Eleanor waited, her pulse racing. Eleanor, my sister is thriving under Aunt Agatha's guidance and your friendship. She is becoming the person she was meant to be. I see now that I contributed to her imprisonment, not maliciously, but through my own blindness and rigidity. You freed her. You showed her that courage is possible. Beatrice freed herself, Eleanor said softly. I merely provided encouragement. You provided far more than that. And I find myself wondering if you might be willing to provide something more for me as well. Eleanor's breath caught. What do you mean? The Duke crossed the room to stand before her, close enough that she could see the vulnerability in his grey eyes. I mean that I have not stopped thinking about you since the day I dismissed you. I mean that I watch you in Lady Agatha's salon and marvel at your intelligence, your wit, your refusal to be diminished by people who believe birth determines worth. I mean that I'm falling in love with you, Eleanor Darrow, and I do not know what to do about it." The world seemed to stop. Eleanor stared at him, unable to process the words she had never dared imagine hearing. You love me. I am terrified by how much I love you. You are everything I was taught a duchess should not be, unconnected, untitled, unwilling to flatter or obey. And yet you are everything I need, everything I want." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "I am a paid companion. Your mother will never accept me. Society will never accept me. I do not care what my mother thinks. I do not care what society thinks. I care what you think." He took her hands, his grip warm and trembling. "Will you marry me, Eleanor? Will you be my duchess, my partner, my equal? Will you teach me how to be vulnerable, how to feel, how to live?" Eleanor could not speak through the tears. She nodded instead, and the Duke, Ashford, pulled her into his arms, holding her as though she were something precious and irreplaceable. "I love you," Eleanor whispered against his chest. "I have loved you for longer than I dared admit." "Then we are both fools," Ashford said, his voice rough with emotion. "But we will be fools together." And in Lady Agatha's study, surrounded by books and instruments of inquiry, Eleanor Darrow chose the impossible. She chose love. The wedding took place 6 months later in the small chapel at Ashford Manor, attended by a carefully curated guest list that favoured intelligence and affection over title and prestige. Lady Agatha served as matron of honour, her smile triumphant. Beatrice stood beside Eleanor, radiant in rose silk, her confidence a testament to the journey she had undertaken. Dr. Finch attended as a friend, his presence a reminder that kindness and grace could exist even in disappointment. The Dowager Duchess attended under protest, her expression glacial throughout the ceremony, but Ashford, standing at the altar in his formal attire, never took his eyes from Eleanor. And when the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, he kissed her with a tenderness that suggested reverence as much as passion. The wedding breakfast was held in Ashford Manor's gardens, transformed by late summer blooms into a riot of colour and fragrance. Guests mingled freely, the usual strictures of rank loosened by Lady Agatha's insistence that intelligence recognises no hierarchy. Poets conversed with politicians, artists debated with scientists, and Eleanor, now Eleanor Fitzalan, Duchess of Ashford, moved among them with a grace born of genuine belonging rather than performance. "You are happy," Beatrice observed, linking her arm through Eleanor's as they walked the garden paths. "I am," Eleanor said, the simple truth of it still astonishing. "Are you?" "I am terrified and exhilarated in equal measure," Beatrice admitted. "Aunt Agatha has introduced me to so many people, and some of them are brilliant and some are absurd. And I find I enjoy distinguishing between the two. I am attending a lecture on astronomy next week. Can you imagine? Me, Beatrice Fitzalan, who once could not enter a drawing room without trembling. I can imagine it. I have always believed you capable of extraordinary things." Beatrice squeezed her arm. "And now you are a duchess. Who would have imagined?" Eleanor laughed. "Not the Dowager, certainly. I believe she is still hoping I will dissolve into mist and reveal myself as a particularly vivid hallucination. Mamma will adjust, or she will not. But Ashford does not care, and that is what matters." It was true. Ashford had made his position clear to his mother in a private interview Eleanor had not been privy to, but the results were evident. The Dowager no longer openly challenged Eleanor's presence, though her disapproval remained palpable. Eleanor found she did not mind. She had not married the Dowager, she had married Ashford. As if summoned by her thoughts, Ashford appeared at her side, offering his arm. "May I steal my wife for a moment?" Beatrice smiled. She was never mine to keep. "Lil!" Ashford led Eleanor away from the crowd, deeper into the gardens, where the noise of the celebration faded to a distant hum. They walked in companionable silence until they reached a stone bench overlooking the estate's lake. its surface reflecting the sky in shades of gold and rose. "Are you overwhelmed?" Ashford asked, settling beside her. "A little, but in the best way." He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I have been thinking about the first time we met. You told me I had no confidence you would succeed with Beatrice. I was insufferably arrogant. You were honest. I appreciated that, even if I found it infuriating." Ashford smiled, the expression transforming his features from severe to genuinely warm. "You have a gift for finding value in my worst qualities. Because your worst qualities, your bluntness, your pride, your impossible standards, come from caring too much, not too little. You were trying to protect Beatrice the only way you knew how. You simply needed someone to show you a different way. I needed you." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "I will spend the rest of my life being grateful I found you, or that you found me. The sequence is unclear." Eleanor leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Lady Agatha found us both, and orchestrated everything with the subtlety of a general planning a military campaign. Aunt Agatha is terrifying and wonderful in equal measure." "She is, rather like you." Ashford laughed, the sound rich and unguarded. "I am not certain whether to be flattered or offended." "Be both. I find you are capable of containing contradictions." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun descend toward the horizon. Eleanor thought of the journey that had brought her here, the loss of her father, the precarious years in London, the humiliation of her dismissal from Ashford Manor, the refuge she had found with Lady Agatha. Every painful step had led to this moment, this man, this unexpected happiness. "I received a letter from Miss Lydia Caldwell," Ashford said suddenly. Eleanor straightened. "Did you?" "She wished to inform me that she is engaged to Viscount Pemberton. The announcement will appear in the Times next week. I hope they will be happy. I suspect they will be adequately matched. Lydia desires a title and social prominence. Pemberton desires a beautiful wife who will not challenge his limited intellect. They will achieve a form of contentment, though I doubt they will achieve what we have." "And what is that?" Ashford turned to face her fully, his grey eyes serious. "Partnership, equality, the freedom to be ourselves, completely and without pretense." Eleanor's throat tightened with emotion. "I love you. I love you. And I promise you this, Eleanor. I will never again choose duty over feeling, obligation over honesty. You have taught me that the two need not be in conflict, that the greatest duty is to the people we love. That is a dangerous philosophy for a duke, perhaps, but it is the only philosophy that allows me to be both a duke and a man." The sun touched the horizon, setting the sky ablaze with colour. In the distance, music drifted from the wedding celebration, a waltz, graceful and bittersweet. Ashford rose and offered his hand. "Dance with me, Duchess." Eleanor placed her hand in his, and they danced alone in the garden, far from the watching eyes of society, moving together with the ease of two people who had found, against all odds and expectations, exactly where they belonged. 1 year later, Eleanor stood in the music room at Ashford Manor, listening as Beatrice played a Chopin nocturne with technical precision and emotional depth. The girl, no, the young woman, had transformed so completely that visitors who had known her in her reclusive years barely recognized her. Beatrice now hosted her own small salon in London, a gathering of young intellectuals who debated everything from women's education to prison reform. She corresponded with scholars across Europe, her French and Italian refined to fluency, and she had, just last month, accepted a proposal from a brilliant young barrister who valued her mind as much as her family connections. The music ended. Beatrice turned from the pianoforte, her smile radiant. "What did you think?" "I think you have surpassed your teacher." "Impossible. You taught me everything." "I taught you technique. You found the emotion yourself." Beatrice rose and embraced Eleanor. "I am happy. I never thought I would be able to say that truthfully, but I am. I am so proud of you," Eleanor whispered. They were interrupted by Ashford, who entered with a letter in his hand and an expression of amused exasperation. "My mother has written. She has heard rumors that you are establishing a school for impoverished girls with musical talent, Eleanor. She wishes to know if this is true, and if so, why you did not consult her first." Eleanor laughed. "It is true. Lady Agatha and I are funding it jointly. We plan to open next year in Bloomsbury, and I did not consult your mother because I knew she would disapprove. She does, vehemently. She has written 3 pages explaining why such an endeavour is inappropriate for a duchess." Ashford crossed the room and kissed Eleanor's forehead. "I have written back informing her that my wife's endeavours are none of her concern, and that I'm exceedingly proud of her." "You did not. I did. Life is too short to waste on appeasing people who refuse to evolve." Eleanor took his hand, marvelling at how naturally the gesture came now. A year ago she had been a dismissed companion, invisible and expendable. Now she was a duchess who used her position to create opportunities for women like herself, women with intelligence and talent, but without fortune or connections. She was precisely the kind of duchess society had not anticipated, and she was perfectly content with that. "I have news," Eleanor said, meeting Ashford's eyes. "Good news, I hope?" "The best. I am with child." Ashford's expression transformed, surprise giving way to wonder, giving way to fierce joy. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "A child," he whispered against her hair. "Our child. Are you pleased?" "Pleased" does not begin to encompass what I feel. Overwhelmed, terrified, ecstatic. Beatrice, forgotten in her brother's emotional response, cleared her throat. "I am to be an aunt. This is excellent news. I shall teach the child everything, music, languages, the art of devastating wit." Ashford laughed. "God help us all." That evening, as Eleanor prepared for bed, she stood at the window overlooking Ashford's estate, her estate now, and reflected on the strange, unlikely path that had brought her here. She had been hired as a companion and found a family. She had been dismissed and found her purpose. She had been underestimated and found her strength. And she had been loved, completely and without reservation, by a man who had learned that vulnerability was not weakness, but the foundation of every meaningful connection. Ashford joined her at the window, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his hands resting on her still flat stomach. "What are you thinking?" "That I am happy, that I am home." "You are. And you have taught me that home is not a place or a title. It is the people we choose to love, and who choose to love us in return." Eleanor turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had once dismissed her, who had challenged her, who had ultimately chosen her above duty and expectation. "Then we are both home." Ashford kissed her, and in that kiss was everything they had endured and overcome: loss and dismissal, pride and vulnerability, fear and courage. And in that kiss was everything they would become together: the Duke and his sharp-witted Duchess, partners, equals, home. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments what part of the world you're listening from. I want to know how far it has travelled. Thank you for joining Eleanor and Ashford on their journey from dismissal to triumph, from isolation to love.